Okay. Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to BAFA IPSIG's autumn webinar for 2025. Thank you for making the time to join us today, and a huge thanks again to Anwar for making the time to present his research on rethinking microfinance and accountability. Um, Anwar Halari is a senior lecturer in accounting at the Open University, prior to which he was senior lecturer at the University of Buckingham. His research interest is very much interdisciplinary and focuses on issues surrounding accountability, sustainability, governance, and social and environmental impacts on organisations and individuals. So I'll keep that introduction short because I'm really excited for Anwar to make a start on this presentation. So Anwar, over to you. Oh, in fact, before we do that, forgive me, just to explain to everyone, if anybody has any questions or observations or comments to make during the presentation, may I please ask you to either post those questions or comments in the chat box, and I will keep an eye on the chat box as Anwar's presenting, or please wait until the end of the presentation where we will have time, we'll have enough time to discuss and also answer any questions as well. And I will keep an eye and I will chair that part of the session. Okay, so Anwar, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for that very kind introduction. And good morning to everyone, or evening, or afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you for joining today. I know how busy we all are, so I do appreciate you being here today. And I'm actually quite looking forward to this presentation and sharing some findings, as it has been one of those really interesting projects that I've been part of, and I've learned so much myself. So hopefully it'll be interesting for you to hear, and hopefully it will spark some good discussions. So in this presentation, I will introduce a very unique microfinance organization that achieves an almost 100% recovery rate on their loans that they issue. And they do that, and this is the kicker really. So they do that without charging any interest or collateral, relying entirely on trust and solidarity and brotherhood. And I'll explain those terms in a minute as we go through the presentation. So my aim is to outline how this trust-based model of accountability works in practice, and discuss how sort of this accountability operates as both a moral and a social mechanism. And in this paper, we argue, or at least offer this powerful alternative to the conventional microfinance approaches. So effectively, imagine that your ability to get a loan isn't relied on any algorithm or credit scores, but entirely based on your character as a person. And this is effectively what this organization does. So it's really interesting in that sense. And before I get to my case study, just a brief context of microfinance and why it matters. So microfinance, I'm assuming, obviously, I'll go through it very briefly, but I'm assuming that most of you understand what a microfinance organization is and how it operates. It's got a long history, but it really sort of started to take off in the 1970s by this Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh, when he started Grameen Bank, that started offering really small loans to people who really needed it. Now, since then, there has been quite a lot of studies and observations and research on microfinance. And in doing so, there's also been a number of critiques. So there's been challenges to the notion that does it really take people out of poverty? There's this idea of debt spirals where people get into debts and then they have to obviously pay interest on those debts. So if they've borrowed the money for whatever reason, if the business is not doing good or whatever, they still have to pay this money back and the interest back. And then in order to do that, they end up taking out more loan to pay the interest. And it's just sort of a vicious cycle really that they get into. There's also been critique of how this whole idea of empowering poor people changed into a more corporate style microfinance where it was all about sort of just making sure that we're charging interest on loans and making a profit from it. And this notion of instead of creating dependency, it's sort of just instead of creating freedom or empowerment, it created dependency on the system. And there's also this concept of microfinance institutions charging really high interest rates to people who are already quite deprived and quite poor. On top of that, what we also have is a lack of knowledge of firstly trust-based models. And there are some examples, and this example that I'll talk about again is a big one. And also on interest-free models, right? So the biggest problem that people are faced within these microfinance institutions is the interest, having to pay that interest, right? So if there is no interest, well, how does that work? And there's also this under-researched role of things like religion, community. How does moral and social accountability come into play? And the focus on outcomes rather than output, right? So most of these microfinance institutions, they talk about how much loan they have given out, the number of people they've given the loans out to, the number of women they've given loans out to. So the focus is really on the numbers, on the output, rather than have they actually changed lives. Have they really pulled people out of poverty, which is really the main, or should be the main thing. So that's where we come in. So in this study, our focus was on an organization that doesn't charge any interest on the loans it's giving out, right? So what you borrow is what you pay back. Now, for the organization, it's a cost to them. As we know that obviously the money has a time value, and if you're not charging interest, you're actually losing out because of inflation or interest or whatever. And how does that model work? So how does this organization keep that model sustained? And those were the exact questions that I had when I first heard about this organization on a road trip to Snowdonia. I was speaking to Sarah before this presentation because I actually don't know where this place is. All I know is it was somewhere on a road trip to Snowdonia. And this is where one of my very close friends, at the time he was working for the Embassy of Pakistan in Paris, mentioned about this organization, and I was just taken in by it. I was like, okay, well, this is amazing. I want to know more. I want to know, how do they pay their bills? How do they pay the salaries of the people they employ? They employ, and how is this sustainable? And a couple of years later, I mean, I was there interviewing people from this organization, observing their training sessions and just doing my field work. So it was fascinating. But Sarah tells me she might know where this place is, so she'll email me later, which would be very nice. So yeah, small world. So at least that mystery is solved. Okay, so to the organization now. So this is the organization that we studied. It's called KUWAS, and the name itself translates to brotherhood or solidarity, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, the vision of this organization really is a poverty-free society that is built on solidarity, on compassion, and on equity. And their core philosophy, now, this is all the stuff that you're seeing on the slide there has been taken from the website, right? So it's not my word, it's what they claim that their philosophy is. So their philosophy is no interest, no collateral, no credit scores. They rely entirely on solidarity, trust, and religious values. Um, and they really want to build this bond within the community where everyone's there for each other. Everyone's helping each other out, and they use that as a basis for their model, their operational model within the organization. And it's quite heavily inspired by religious values, and I'll again get to that later in this presentation. And that has a big role to play in how they operate as an organization. So um, their focus on solidarity, now again, this has been taken out from the website, and the whole notion around their business model, as it were, is to ensure that we're all in this together, we as a community, and we're all in this to help each other out, and that's effectively what their um, their philosophy is. And when I was there interviewing people and just trying to understand their model and how all of this works, I couldn't help but think about um, this this idea of solidarity and this concept of a shallow pond argument that is put forward by a moral philosopher, Peter Singer, from Australia, and he makes this argument where so what he's saying is that if you see a girl drowning in a shallow pond, for example, right? So the first thing you'll do is you'll jump into that pond to save that child, right? You wouldn't worry about what you're wearing. You wouldn't worry about if you've got an expensive phone in your pocket or what shoes you're wearing. You just jump in, right? Your whole goal would be to save that girl. And he claims that that's the moral imperative, right? That's what most of us will do. If we don't do it, right, we're moral monsters, right? So I mean, why wouldn't we, right? We'll jump into that pond and we'll save the child. Now when I was there, interviewing people and just trying to understand this whole idea of solidarity, um, I mean, this came to my mind. I was like, okay, so what this organization is trying to do is trying to create that shallow pond, and that shallow pond is people in poverty, um, and they're emphasizing that it's our collective moral duty as a community to pull people out from that pond, um, and and we should do that as good moral actors within the community, which is like, it makes sense, right? So yeah, this is exactly what we should do. The only caveat to that is, so in the argument that Peter Singer puts forward, right? So we will save that little girl in the shallow pond when we see that little girl as we are walking um, um, to work or whatever. But at the same point, we know that there are millions of girls in sort of drowning in shallow ponds throughout the world, but it doesn't phase us, it doesn't bother us, because we don't see it, right? We don't see those girls. We can't connect with them. They're far away or whatever. We're not too concerned. Um, and I suppose why we are not concerned is that we are wired, as human beings, we're wired for empathy, right? We feel empathy toward other human beings. However, that empathy sort of rarely extends beyond our line of sight, right? So things we don't see, things we can't feel, we sort of either ignore it or don't want to think about it. Even if we want to think about it, we just don't have the capacity to just think about, I don't know, millions of people drowning in poverty, for example, because there's not much we can do as an individual. Um, so, 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 so in this case, I mean, what Akuwat's trying to do is bringing that focus, that attention on, well, we can help with the community. We have a problem in the community, and we want to take people out of that poverty, make them, um, individuals, that can, that don't have to rely on anyone else. So give them that empowerment, as it were. Um, Now, just to sort of just staying on that solidarity point, a few weeks ago I came across this podcast, and it was quite a serendipitous encounter in a way. And I was thinking about um, Akuwas and this research, and then in this presentation, um, a professor from finance, so the photo you see there, Professor Moshe um, Milewski. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that last name, so do apologize if I'm not. But he talks about the very first pensions scheme, or the very first annuity scheme in the 17th century Scotland, where he says that scheme was again built around this idea of solidarity. And let me explain how. So, sorry, I think it was the 18th century, 18th century Scotland. Yeah. Um, so, so during that time, so this pension scheme where people would contribute to the scheme regardless of age, right? So what that meant was, if you're younger than other people in that scheme, you would end up paying more in that scheme, but you'll still get the same money at the end of it, right? So the younger you are at a disadvantage, and the older you are, you're at sort of a advantage, because the younger people are then subsidizing your pension, and people still contributed to that scheme, um, even even knowing that, okay, if they are young, they're still, they're sort of having to pay more than the older people in that pension scheme. And one of the members of the scheme was Adam Smith. So the Adam Smith, the father of economics, the author of Wealth of Nations, right? So he was part of that scheme, and at the time he was quite young. He wasn't married. Um, he had a choice of how much he can contribute. So he didn't have a choice whether he can contribute or not, but he had a choice of how much he can contribute. So I think it ranged from 3% to I think it was 15%. And Adam Smith, so this he's a really smart, intelligent guy. He understands economics, right? This guy decides to contribute the maximum amount to the scheme. Now the question is why, right? So because this goes against you know any rational theory of value maximization. Why would you? If you could contribute the least amount, you would still get the same amount of money at the end of it. So why would you do that? And Professor Moshe, so he explains only reason, of course, the only reason he did that was out of solidarity, and that was because in that scheme everyone sort of knew each other, right? So they're either your colleagues or people that taught you in the past, and the fact that if the tables were turned, so if you were the older person and the older people were younger, they would do the same. So this this idea of solidarity really does work. It's quite a powerful force. And it this historical examples like in this case where it has worked successfully. There's so the one thing we learn is like there is these other ways of pulling people together, having to work towards something without any penalties, any financial implications. People just want to do this. Um, if you can really build that idea of solidarity within your business model or your operation or community or whatever it might be. So coming back to the case organization, Akuwa, so I'll briefly explain how their model works and how is it applied in practice. so so say if you're a poor member of the community and you are in need of money, you'll go to this organization and ask for however much money you need. And the first thing they will tell you is that to go back to your community and bring at least two more individuals who are in a similar situation as you, which means they wouldn't give money out or the loan out to you on an individual basis. They'll do that in a group basis. Now, it's not difficult for the person who wants the money to go back to the community to find two more people because of course he belongs to a community where poverty is there. People do need he can easily find more people who can perhaps use the money to build their business or whatever, buy a motorbike or to go to work, whatever it might be, doesn't matter. So they'll ask you to do that. And I think the biggest implication of that is that it creates um, that web of accountability, right? So if I need some money, I'm now being asked to go back to my community to find two more people. And then just doing so, firstly, I'll find people who I know I can rely, because now we're all part of a group and we'll all be given money and we'll all make sure that we're not just misusing that money. We're not just going out and spending that money. We're doing what we said we would do with that money. So instantly it creates that um, layer of accountability because now you're a group and you all are accountable to each other. The other thing this organization does is it does this community-based evaluation, right? So it will go out in the community and try and just gauge the character of the person that is looking for the money. So the loan officer, they'll go out to shopkeepers, they'll speak to neighbors, they'll go to the places of worship to work out, like what is this person like, really? So just to sort of gauge the character, So if you're a bad actor in the community, someone will always know, right? So I think that's another way of them ensuring that the money they're giving out is to the right person, is to the right individual. Then they also get the families involved, right? So just to add another layer of accountability, so they'll make sure if you're a husband that your wife knows that you're taking the money out. If if you're a woman, your husband, your brother, or someone in the community knows you're taking the money out. And I'll explain why that also matters later when I talk about some of the findings. And finally, and this was to me again very, very interesting, is that the when the loan is approved and um, they they've decided, yes, we'll give money out to this many people. They do it in an open public space, right? So it's either a mosque or a church or a school, somewhere where you know people can see that you're receiving the money. It's like it's in open space, and mostly it's in a spiritual place like a mosque or a church, depending on the person that is receiving this loan. And again, that has quite a lot of implications of how the system works, and I'll get to that in a minute as well. So why is this model unique? Well, firstly, it's entirely based on trust and solidarity with the community. It doesn't rely on any matrices or credit scores or what have you. It collectivizes accountability. So just in the previous slide, it's group based. It involves the community. It speaks to people in the community. So it's not about just atomizing accountability, but it's more about collectivizing it. It's based on moral capital. So how are you as a person? It doesn't matter what you've done in the past with your money. Are you a good person, right? Can we trust you as a individual? And it is community driven. People in the community are spoken to understand about that individual. So it's very unique, very different to what a traditional model would look like in an organization. So how is this model sustainable? I mean, that was my main question when I heard about that organization. How does it work? And the more I understood about this organization, what was clear was, solidarity plus that moral imperative, together creates this really powerful system of community accountability where people want, they want to pay back the money they get. They want to, because they appreciate and they understand why this organization is doing what it's doing. They don't want to default. They don't want their business to, if the money is taken out to run a business, they don't want the business to fail. So it really works. It really creates that sense of, I want to make sure that uh, this money is put into right use, and that I'm able to pay this money back. And it's amazing how sort of that whole system works. Okay, so I'll briefly talk about accountability and why accountability is important for this research. So accountability is why we do accounting. Now, as most of us know, especially people here who teach accounting, we do accounting because we want to make sure the organization or whoever is accountable for their actions, right? And it builds this mechanism of trust in the organization. So by releasing their accounts or disclosing their accounts, they're showing that, yes, we've done what we said we would do, or we're not hiding anything. You can, it ensures that um, there is trust within there. I mean, that's what, audit reports are for, performance review and all of that. And that's how trust is maintained in an organization or in a capitalist system, as it were. But also, a lot of people that I really follow and admire, people like Roberts and Power and Gray, Babington, they all also talk about the social side of accountability, where they say that, social and relational, these are the foundation that makes accountability meaningful. So it's not just about box ticking or showing that, yeah, I've done this, this is the report, that's me discharging my accountability. Well, this is it's more than that. It's a relational um, um, contract. It's a social contract, and that really makes this, or gives accountability meaning. And again, going back to Akuwa's case, so what Akuwa does is it tries to shift that moral, sort of the box checking accountability to a more moral and spiritual and sort of community based accountability, and that model works amazingly in practice with some limitations. Now I'll talk about some of the limitations in a minute as well, but it really does, you can see how this system works, and within a system like that, why we might not need things like aggressive, loan collection protocols or credit scores or any of that. And what it does is, in a system like that, it creates this peer-to-peer sort of community-based horizontal accountability, where we feel we're accountable to each other. So we're not accountable to, to someone higher up, or we're more accountable to the community, to people we live with, to each other, and that really makes us want to do good, in not just in the community, but also makes us do good as a person. And I think in this case you could really see how that plays out in practice. So in terms of methodology, I won't go into a lot of detail, but we so this was done. So the study was done by myself and my colleague, Dr. Anis Farooq from Heriot Watt University, and we both did the field work, spoke to a number of people, but we wanted to get sort of a more holistic sense of what this organization mean to people, and how did it work. So we spoke to, obviously, the organization, but not just the organization. We also spoke to people like the loan officers, the people who go out and speak to people, or the community or neighbors or whoever. We spoke to them. We also spoke to the beneficiaries, the people who need the loans. Some of the examples you can see on the table, so people like local vendors, tailors, farmers, people who need money to stand up on their feet, to try and come out of poverty. So we spoke to all of them. I also observed some of the training that these loan officers get from the organization. So it was quite insightful, and quite interesting. And I suppose we had to talk to these many people to understand how this organization, how does it operate, and how does this sort of model works really. These are some of the pictures that I took during my field work. Now, one of the things that really struck to me was, so if you look at that top right hand photo there where people are sat on the carpet, right? So that's an office of a Kuvas that I visited, right? So you can see this is bare minimum, right? There's no tables or chairs or any of that, right? So it's literally an empty space with carpets and cushions for people to sit. And the people you see on the left hand side of that picture are people who came to, you know, so these are the people who wants the loan. And the officer is sort of speaking to them about the process of that. So they keep their cost to the literally bare minimum. That's one of the ways how um, they run as an organization. They keep this industry model, sustainable. And then on top of that, there's the photo you see underneath that is where they talk about all the ideas that I'm talking to you about in this presentation. So solidarity, interest-free, why that is a core principle for this organization. Community, brotherhood, all of that is sort of in that poster that you see in there, and that poster is in all their offices where they emphasize their core philosophy. And that big picture you see there is the photo or I took by, so that's one of the recipients of the loan. That's their house. That's where they live. So as you can imagine, we're talking about really people are really don't have much for them. All you see is a bed and a little shed where they live. So this organization is really targeting the poorest of the poor in the society, and helping them to come out of of that poverty. So what did we find now? The most interesting finding for us was this idea of social capital and sacredness, right? So this religious setting, giving out loans in mosques or churches, for example, the sanctity of the space combined with public visibility, it all sort of comes together and it forms a social collateral, right? So so this, obviously they don't have the money for any financial collateral anyway, but what this creates is that social contract in a way where you're accepting this loan in a sacred space in full view of public, your friends, your family, whoever, and this makes you want to use that money for the right cause, or at least for the right reasons and what you claim to use the money for. Anyway, so some of the people we spoke to, they said we feel like we're borrowing this money not just from the organization itself, but from sort of the community and from God himself or herself. Like so right, so it's creating that spiritual connection as well in a way. So the borrower feels they're committed to for this loan on three levels. So obviously the first and the most basic level is the organization, obviously, but on top of that, the social norms in the community. So, okay, so that's one level. Socially, they feel they're committed. Spiritually, they feel they're committed, right? So to receiving money in the mosque, for example, again, just creates that in itself. And then all of that also makes them personally want to make sure that they repay this money, and not use it for anything else, for example. So it creates that internalized self accountability as well within these loan recipients. So that was quite an insightful thing that we found, that really helps this organization achieve that recovery rate, right, without charging any interest. And the second thing was so interesting. So if there's any actuaries or people that study risk management, it would be so useful because so what this organization does, and that's going back to my initial point when I introduced this organization, was that it relies on the community to tell them about the person they're giving the loan out to. So one of the um, uh, people we spoke to said that, and it's quite interesting actually. They said that the community knows who deserves the loan and who doesn't. Someone there would know. So if you're a bad actor, um, someone will know, right? So there's this web of intelligence which really helps create this really effective risk management for this organization, right? So it doesn't have to rely on any financial risk matrix or risk models, because the people are telling them how good or how bad a person is who's asking for the loan, right? And the bullet point 3 you see there was so interesting, right? So one of the loan officers said to me, is that people in the community, they essentially do the risk management for us. We don't have to do it because all we need to do is just talk to these people, and we know whether we're giving the loan out to the right person or not. So again, this really interesting way of risk managing is fascinating. So that was another thing that we found, which was quite interesting for us. And going back to the, the, the point on solidarity and brotherhood, it really works, right? So the recipients of these loans we spoke to, they really believed in this mission of this organization. They really believed in what they were doing. Because they really believed in that, they wanted to make sure that that they use this money and that they're able to pay back. So they wanted to pay back, because they believed in this organization, and not just that, but they wanted to pay more than what they borrowed, because they wanted the next person to be helped out. So the next person who also needs money, because if this organization fails, there is no one looking after these poor individuals, right? So they all believed in that. They all saw the value in that, and they were like, I really want to do good. There wasn't anyone else at my time to help me out, but this organization came to help me out, right? So it really works. This concept of brotherhood, this community bond, and this solidarity really makes people want to pay back their loans, and not just that, but also pay back more, so the next person could be helped out. Um, and and again, it was beautiful to see something like that work in practice. Now, there was also some unintended consequences of this. Okay, so this model is not without friction. There is friction in the system, and one of the biggest frictions is that trust can be broken, and it's quite sad when it happens. We know communities are messy. There's things happening in the community, uh, and what we heard from these loan officers who go out in the community to gauge or to understand a bit more about the individual. And then once the loan's given out, they still have to sort of keep making those visits to make sure that the person is doing all right, and or at least they're getting the money back, either monthly or weekly or bi-monthly, or whatever the arrangement is. They found that those visits quite be demoralizing, because these people are quite poor in the first place, and if they're unable to pay, emergencies happen, something's happened in the community, they had to use that money, I don't know, to help someone else out, or whatever. And therefore they haven't been able to make that monthly payment they promised they will. How do you deal with that? It's quite challenging, like for loan officers to go and investigate this, and and there's disputes in the within the community. So there's this downside to it, which can make this model, this amazing model, maybe um, falter a bit uh, in some cases. And also, the other thing we heard was that these loan officers who also um, work on bare minimum wages for the organization, because firstly they believe in it, and secondly they want to do good. They are that kind of a person that wants to help out the communities. They found themselves having to work um, long hours, especially in the evenings and the weekends, because the people they're giving this money out to, they're not available in the day because they're working during the daytime hours. So if they've taken this money for, I don't know, to run a business, to get a motorbike to travel to work, whatever, they're just not available. So in order for for the loan officers to make these visits, it has to be during like evenings, late evenings, at weekends, right? So they're having to put in those extra hours. Um, so their workloads are quite intense. Um, and also this organization, because you know it it has to get this money, right? In order for it to work, they need to get this loan they're giving out to people back, and in order to do so, so they need the system of people going and visiting and making sure the money is put into right use. So that could be quite draining um, for the workers or the loan officers that take on those roles. And lastly, the loan repayment rates at this organization shows such a high rate also acts as a form of currency, which gives this organization legitimacy to operate as an organization in a credible way. And again, that comes with certain consequences, like making those visits, making sure um, they're getting the money back. Um, of course, because they work on an interest-free model, that is quite essential for them. So yeah, this model again is not without friction. And I suppose I wanted to bring this in because I don't know how many of you here have watched the movie Interstellar. I'm a big um, cinema fan, and I think this really spoke to me um, when well, after doing this free work, and obviously I knew about this movie. So the quote is from Dr. Mann in Interstellar, where he says that we care deeply and selfishly about those that we know, but that empathy really extends our line of sight, right? So the point is, can this model, this very close-knit, community-based model, trust-based model, one that is built on brotherhood, empathy, solidarity, can this be replicated in a less tight-knit community, in a community like what we find ourselves in the Western societies, where it's more individual based, and it's more sort of, the communities are not maybe as close as in other places. Um, so can a model like this work here? Perhaps the answer is no, it can't, um, and I just wanted to leave that quote there because this there might be the reason why it doesn't. So just to quickly conclude, and then I'll open the floor for. I'm sure you probably have a lot of questions. I'll be happy to address as many of them as possible. But what we've tried to do in this study is offer a counter narrative to the conventional microfinance models, and really show how social, moral, and spiritual capital can really sometimes outperform financial risk matrices, for example, and also the insights of how rituals, community standings, character assessments, how can this create a, a, a system of accountability where, um, you know, people really do want to pay back, do want to discharge their, they feel accountable, and they really do want to do good. We also sort of show how trust is used as a resource for this organization to help secure funding, to help get volunteers to work for them. But also, it highlights some of the unintended consequences. So, the excessive workloads, the demoralizing recovery visits. So we really wanted to open up this debate on how alternative forms of microfinance, forms that are more inclusive, more trust-based, how can they complement sort of the more mainstream microfinance programs? And yeah, and finally, we try and contribute to this wider literature on NGO accountability and how cultural and religious values can be, can be quite transformative, or can really drive organization objectives using that spiritual, moral, and social capital, which can be quite a powerful force. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm sure you've got a number of questions. So I'll hand it back to Sarah. And yeah, I'll be more than happy to take questions. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for being here.
Okay, hi. Thank you for such a thought-provoking and interesting presentation, Anwar. Thank you. I have a few questions myself as well, but I'll open the floor up to everybody else first. We do have some comments and questions in the chat box as well, which I'll come to as well in a bit later on. But first, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Anwar? And before I forget, I will stop the recording now. So I'll just do that first.